You have been deceived. We have been lied to our entire lives about the greatest achievements of the early 20th century, fed beautiful tales of heroism, diligence, and engineering genius. But one only needs to cast aside school textbooks for a second and pick up a calculator, and this entire grand picture crumbles to dust. We are used to looking at black and white photographs of giant liners and believing the captions in museums. But have you ever asked yourself what exactly it is you are seeing? Who actually built these colossal structures, which even today, 100 years later, seem like the pinnacle of technological progress? Why do scientists remain silent about the egregious discrepancies in figures and timelines? Prepare yourselves, because today we will shatter one of the main myths of the industrial era. We will look beneath the plating of the legendary Titanic, but we will not be interested in the iceberg or the romantic story of Jack and Rose. We will talk about cold, hard steel and mathematical impossibility. The subject of our investigation is rivets. Yes, ordinary metal rods that fastened the giant's hull. The official story states that there were 3 million of them. 3 million metal fingers holding thousands of tons of steel. And all of them, as historians assure us, were hammered in by hand. Do you hear that sound? It is the sound of logic breaking. Let's return to Belfast at the beginning of the 20th century. The Harland and Wolff shipyard. We are told that construction was bustling. Thousands of workers like ants were creating this ark. But let's engage critical thinking. The official date of the keel laying is March 31st, 1909. The launch took place on May 31st, 1911. We have just over 2 years to assemble the main framework and cover it with steel plates. 2 years. 790 days. Let's assume they worked without days off, without holidays, without strikes, and without breaks for bad weather, which in itself is a fantasy for rainy Ireland. But let's be generous and keep this figure. 790 days, 3 million rivets. Pick up a calculator right now. Divide 3 million by 790. That comes out to almost 3,800 rivets per day. Every single day. And this is just for one ship, while its twin sister, the Olympic, was being built alongside it, requiring the same resources and efforts. Do you begin to grasp the scale of the absurdity? To comprehend the impossibility of this figure, one needs to understand the technology of that time. The installation of a single rivet is not a hammer blow to a nail. It is a complex team operation, requiring jeweler's precision and hellish physical strength. The process looked like this. First, the rivet needed to be heated in a portable forge to white heat. The metal's temperature had to be critical for it to become pliable, but not melt. A special rivet heater boy was responsible for this. Then, with tongs, he would take out this red-hot piece of metal and throw it, yes, literally throw it through the air to a catcher who stood on scaffolding near the hull. The catcher had to catch the fiery projectile in a bucket or a special cone without killing himself and those around him in the process. Then the rivet was inserted into the hole, and only then did the riveters step in. 2 men with heavy sledgehammers began to strike the protruding end, forming the rivet head, while from the other side, a third worker leaned with his entire body on a dolly bar, so that the rivet would not fly out backwards. 4 people for 1 point. The coordination of actions had to be perfect. One miss, and the metal cooled, the rivet is spoiled. It needs to be drilled out. Drilling out by hand, spending hours of precious time. And now, imagine this conveyor in reality. 3,800 times a day, this crew must repeat the deadly dance with red-hot metal. How much time is needed for one rivet? Heating, throw, insertion, riveting. cooling. Even if we assume they were robots, one quality rivet took at least 4 to 5 minutes of grueling labor. There are only 1,440 minutes in a day. Even if working around the clock, one crew cannot manage this. They will tell us, there were many crews, hundreds of crews. But allow me. The ship's hull is not an endless field. It is a limited space. People had to stand on scaffolding, hang on ropes, climb into narrow compartments of the double bottom. You cannot place 5,000 people on one section of the side. They will simply kill each other with sledgehammers. The density of workplaces has a physical limit. Moreover, the quality of manual riveting cannot be stable. The human factor is inevitable. Fatigue, a trembling hand, insufficiently heated metal. But when we look at photographs of the plating of the Titanic or Olympic, we see perfect rows, as if a machine printed them. The geometry of the lines is flawless. The rivet heads are identical to the millimeter. Is such a thing possible with manual labor, when hundreds of different people with different striking strengths hit the metal? The official story claims, yes, it's craftsmanship. But any metallurgical engineer will tell you, this is a statistical anomaly. It is impossible to achieve machine-like precision at the hands of thousands of semi-literate workers, toiling in smoke, noise, and constant danger. Herein lies a trick that is meticulously hidden from us. They are trying to sell us the image of a heroic worker with a hammer, but this image tears at the seams as soon as we start calculating. 3 million blows. Millions of man-hours compressed into unrealistic deadlines. And we haven't even talked about the weight of the hull plates themselves yet. Steel plates weighing several tons. They had to be lifted, the holes perfectly aligned, and then fastened. In the early 20th century, when cranes were primitive and slow, how did they ensure such assembly precision that 3 million holes aligned perfectly? After all, if the holes in 2 plates are misaligned by even a millimeter, the rivet will not fit. It cannot be forced in. It needs to be re-drilled. And that's more time. Time they didn't have. Official shipyard reports are full of figures for payments and worker numbers, but these papers could be as much of a sham as our entire chronology. Why are we not shown blueprints of tools capable of automating this process? Or perhaps such tools officially did not exist because they belonged to a different technological era? We look at the Titanic as the pinnacle of the Industrial Revolution. But what if it is merely a remnant, a legacy of a more advanced civilization, which we simply appropriated and tried to copy, but never truly understood how it was actually made? The numbers scream this. Mathematics cannot lie, unlike historians rewriting textbooks at the dictation of the victors. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of lies. Next, we will go deeper, and you will see that the problem is not only with the rivets. The problem is where the people capable of building such a thing came from. Look closely at the archival photographs of the Harland and Wolff shipyard. Do you see this cyclopean steel forest surrounding the skeletons of the future liners? These are the Errol gantry scaffolds. Officially, we are told that this structure was erected specifically for the construction of the Olympic-class ships. But let's pause for a second and ponder what we are seeing. Before us is an engineering structure that, in its complexity and technological sophistication, almost surpasses the ships themselves. A height of almost 70 meters, a length of 260 meters. Giant cranes, electric lifts, movable platforms. And all of this, supposedly, was built in the shortest possible time just to assemble a couple of ships. This is economically meaningless, unless this infrastructure was inherited by us from an era about which historians prefer to remain silent. But let's return to our rivets, for it is in them that the devil of details lies, destroying the official worldview. Shipbuilding historians, cornered by mathematics, reluctantly admit, yes, some of the rivets were installed by hydraulic machines. They call them iron men. These were enormous tongs, suspended from cranes, that compressed the red-hot rivet with water pressure. It would seem, here it is, the solution to the mystery. Machines did all the work. But don't rush to rejoice. Official technical documentation states that hydraulics were used only on the keel and in some sections of the bottom. Do you know why? Because these machines were unwieldy monsters, weighing several tons. They physically could not reach the vertical sides, the curved plates of the stern or bow, and certainly not the internal bulkheads. The gap between the press jaws was limited, and the boom's reach did not allow working at height without a highly complex suspension system, which we do not observe in photographs of mass work. It turns out that 80 or even 90% of the hull is still that same notorious manual labor, the impossibility of which we have already proven. Let's delve deeper into the purely physical aspect. The thickness of the Titanic's steel hull plates reached 37 millimeters. That's almost 4 centimeters of alloy steel. To fasten 2 such plates overlapping and ensure water tightness, colossal force must be applied. A manual hammer blow, even if delivered by a strong man, impacts the surface pointwise and impulsively. The rivet metal cools in a matter of seconds. If you fail to form the head and fill the hole with metal before the temperature drops below the critical point, the rivet will contract incorrectly upon cooling. It will not pull the plates together. A microgap will appear. For a submarine or a transatlantic liner, this is a death sentence even before launch. Water under pressure will find a way. But the Titanic was considered unsinkable precisely because of the quality of its assembly. How could a crowd of exhausted workers with sledgehammers ensure quality that is only achievable today by robotic lines? Here we approach another glaring contradiction: logistics and human resources. Belfast at the beginning of the 20th century, an industrial city, but not an endless one. To maintain the construction pace stated in official reports, 15,000 people should have been working at the shipyard simultaneously. 15,000 men of conscription age, possessing high qualifications. Where did they live? An analysis of Belfast maps from that period does not show us gigantic new residential areas built for this army of workers. Where was the infrastructure? Where were the mess halls capable of feeding a legion? Where were the hospitals, which should have been overflowing with people suffering from injuries, burns, and occupational deafness? Imagine the acoustic impact from hundreds of hammers simultaneously striking a hollow metal hull, acting as a giant resonator. That's thousands of decibels. Without modern hearing protection, after a month of such work, half the city should have gone deaf. But medical archives show no surge of mass deafness in Belfast in 1910. Strange, isn't it? As if these 15,000 people simply did not exist in our reality. What if they truly didn't exist? What if we are looking at a process not of construction, but of restoration? Look at the photos from those years from a different angle. We see people scurrying around a massive hull, but are they building it from scratch? Or are they merely servicing, painting, and replacing individual components on something that was created long before them? This explains both the lack of necessary infrastructure for workers and the impossibility of manual riveting on such a scale. They did not hammer 3 million rivets. They, perhaps, replaced a couple of thousand to put an ancient mechanism into operation. This resolves all mathematical contradictions. There's no need to search for lost hydraulic technologies if the hull was already complete. But then a question arises that sends shivers down one's spine. Who built these ships initially? And why was the technology of their creation lost to such an extent that we were forced to invent tales of heroic riveters? Pay attention to the steel plates themselves, their size and quality. In the early 20th century, metallurgy was undoubtedly developing, but the production of rolled sheets of such an area and such perfect flatness is a challenge even for modern factories. The Titanic's plates, according to photos, were enormous. How were they transported? Railways of that time had dimensional limitations. Roads for horse-drawn transport, even more so. We are shown carts with horses pulling anchors. But where are the photos of hundreds of tons of rolled steel being transported through city streets? They are absent. Either the factories stood right at the shipyard, which was not the case, or logistics were carried out in ways they forgot to tell us about. Or, I repeat, these sheets were not transported anywhere, because they were already part of a structure that had stood there for centuries. We are accustomed to thinking that progress is linear, that we move from the primitive to the complex. But the story of the Titanic, if stripped of its Hollywood gloss, screams the opposite. We see degradation. We see attempts to service high-level technology with primitive tools. It's as if today, after a global catastrophe, survivors tried to repair a nuclear power plant with stone axes and then created legends about how they built it. The Titanic's rivets are not just fasteners. They are nails in the coffin of the official version of history. And the more closely we look at the metal, the more clearly the traces of a completely different civilization emerge. A civilization that operated with different energies and different scales. Now let's descend from the scaffolding, where we left our fictional riveters, and peek into the very belly of this Leviathan. If the mathematics of rivets causes you doubt, then the logistics of fuel should simply blow your mind. The official specification of the Titanic states that its heart beat thanks to coal. 29 giant boilers, 159 furnaces. For this behemoth to move at a speed of 20 knots, it had to consume over 600 tons of coal per day. 600 tons. Imagine a railway train of 10 heavily loaded wagons. And all of this had to be thrown into the furnaces manually, with shovels. We are told that 176 people worked in the stokeholds. Divide 600 tons by 176. It turns out that each stoker, working in hell where the air temperature reached 50 degrees Celsius, had to shovel almost 3.5 tons of coal per shift. And not just shovel it, but distribute it evenly over the grates. This is biomechanical nonsense. The human body, even the most trained, would burn out from such work in a couple of days. The heart would not withstand it. But we are told that these people worked like this for voyages, for years. Here we encounter the same paradox as with the rivets. The technical requirements exceed the physical capabilities of a person of that time. What if coal is not the Titanic's native fuel? Look at the diagrams of the engine rooms. They look like a chaotic jumble of pipes and boilers crammed into a space that was clearly designed for something else. Elegant, compact, and powerful. There is a theory that we, having inherited these giant vessels from a past civilization, simply couldn't start their original reactors. We gutted the high-tech innards, whose working principle was incomprehensible to us. Perhaps it was atmospheric electricity or ether energy, which Tesla and Mendeleev spoke so much about before their works were edited. And in place of this clean energy, we, like barbarians, inserted primitive steam boilers, turning a noble ship into a gigantic smoking furnace. We forced it to run on wood and coal because that was our limit. This explains why the Titanic's funnels were so disproportionately huge. The fourth funnel was even fake, as historians admit. Why was it there? For ventilation? Or was it a remnant of an old system whose purpose we have forgotten? Now ascend to the upper decks, to the first-class salons. Do you see this stark dissonance? Below, the hellish, dirty, impossible labor of stokers, and above, interiors worthy of Roman emperors' palaces. Perfect oak carvings, huge glass domes, mosaics, inlays. Who created this? The same people who lived in the dirty barracks of Belfast. Where are the schools of masters capable of such delicate work on an industrial scale? We see here a clash of two worlds. The technology of hull construction and interior finishing is centuries ahead of the technology of operation. It's as if a bonfire were lit inside a spaceship to keep warm. We use artifacts of a great era, like savages who found a smartphone and use it as a cutting board. But the most terrifying aspect lies in demographics. Why build such giants at all in 1912? The Earth's population, according to official data, was many times smaller. Migration? Yes, we are told about millions of Irish and Italians sailing to America, but look at the photographs of third-class passengers. They look not like people seeking a better life, but like refugees after a global catastrophe. Their clothes are often ill-fitting. Their faces express not hope, but lostness. There is a theory that the early 20th century is not the dawn of civilization, but a period of post-apocalypse. The Great Reset had already occurred. Cities stood empty or semi-submerged. Recall the famous first floors that went underground. And these ark ships were used not for tourism, but for the mass resettlement of survivors, for populating cleared territories. Olympic, Titanic, Britannic. These were not commercial projects. These were transports of a new world order. Their true capacity could have been much greater than officially stated. We are told about 3,000 people, but the ship's size allows for 10,000 if luxury, which might have been mere decoration to divert attention, is removed. Notice the strange empty spaces on the blueprints, designated as cargo holds or mail rooms. What was truly transported there? Terraforming equipment? Or perhaps children? Those very orphans who filled all the world's orphanages in those years, and whose origins are so obscure. The story of orphan trains is known to all. But why do we not think about orphan ships? We look at the Titanic as a tragedy of hubris, but perhaps it was a planned operation of disposal of evidence. If these ships were the legacy of a past civilization, they needed to be destroyed after they had fulfilled their resettlement function. It could not be allowed for people to start asking questions. How did we build this if we can't even make a decent stainless steel spoon? The destruction of the Titanic was not a collision with an iceberg. It was a ritual sacrifice, and simultaneously, a cleanup of technological traces. Look at the list of the deceased. Among them were many millionaires who opposed the creation of the Federal Reserve System. Convenient, isn't it? Two birds with one stone. Financial opponents were removed, and technologies that should not have reached new humanity were sunk. In photographs of the Titanic's departure, people on the pier look like ants against the backdrop of an alien spaceship. We do not match the scale of these structures. The doors are too tall for us. The ceilings are excessive. Handrails on some decks are strangely low, or conversely, too high. This is architecture not for a person 1 meter 70 centimeters tall. This is architecture for giants, about whom legends were told, and who, apparently, were exterminated shortly before this. We simply took their places, put on their clothes, which hang on us like sacks, and tried to operate their machines. And the outcome was inevitable. The Titanic could not help but sink. It was the programmed death of a relic. But the disaster opened Pandora's box, which authorities have been trying to close for 100 years, inventing tales of icebergs and accidents. But ice is not the only thing that pierced the hull. It was pierced by the truth, which is only now beginning to surface. Now that we have realized the impossibility of constructing and the absurdity of operating these giants, it is time to ask the most terrifying question. Why were they in such a hurry to get rid of these ships? The story of the Titanic's demise is not just a series of tragic accidents. It is a planned operation to destroy evidence that could reveal our true origin. Recall the story of the ship Olympic, the Titanic's older brother. A year before the disaster, the Olympic collided with the cruiser Hawk. It sustained a huge breach, and this is where it gets interesting. The engineer's verdict: the Olympic was at fault, and insurance would not be paid. The company incurred colossal losses, but instead of repairing the ship, they performed strange maneuvers. There is a popular theory about the ship swap, but let's look at it from the perspective of lost technologies. What if we simply could not physically repair the Olympic? What if the hull plating alloy, created by an ancient civilization, was so complex in composition that our patches made of primitive 1910 steel simply fell off? We were faced with a situation where Aboriginals tried to repair a space shuttle with clay and twigs. We did not possess the technology of welding or molecular bonding that was originally used. We could only drill holes and insert our crude rivets, violating the structural integrity. The damaged Olympic became a useless piece of metal that was impossible to restore. And then the decision was made to send it to the bottom, disguised as the brand new Titanic, receiving insurance and, more importantly, covering their tracks. This was a cover-up operation for our technological helplessness. We did not build these ships. We wore them out. And when they broke down, we sank them, because repair was beyond our comprehension. Look at the nature of the Titanic's damage: the hull rupture. Officially, we are told that the steel was brittle due to sulfur impurities. Again, this convenient lie. The steel was not brittle. It was different. It was designed for different stresses and a different environment. Perhaps for an ethereal environment about which we know nothing. Exposure to our dense, aggressive atmosphere and water made this metal vulnerable, like a fish pulled onto land. This brings us to the global picture of the world at that time. Look around. The Titanic was not alone. At the very same time, all over the world, from America to Australia, stand supposedly just built grandiose buildings, railway stations, libraries, capitals. All of them are executed in a unified antique style, with gigantic doors, columns, and domes. And for each of them, we are told the same old tale. Built in 2 years, with picks and shovels, stone transported by horses. Do you feel this pattern? The Titanic is a floating cathedral of that very same era. It is part of a single global infrastructure that came to us after some catastrophe that occurred in the 19th century. We call it the Victorian era, but perhaps it was an era of looting. We populated empty cities, started surviving factories, somehow stoked the boilers on great ships, and called it industrialization. We are a cargo cult civilization. We pray to blueprints we don't understand and imitate the actions of gods who lived before us. Look at the demographic gaps of the mid-19th century. Where are the billions of people? Why are photos of cities from that time so empty? Why are the first floors of buildings buried in clay all over the world? These are traces of that very mud flood or other cataclysm that wiped out the previous inhabitants of the planet. And we are those who came after, or those who were grown in test tubes to populate this empty world. That is why the official history of the Titanic is so important to us. It creates an illusion of continuity. It tells us, look, your grandfathers built this. But an inner voice, looking at these riveted seams and majestic interiors, whispers, no, we are not capable of such a thing. Even today, with our computers and robots, we cannot replicate the facade stucco of an ordinary 19th century apartment building with the same ease and elegance. And they ask us to believe that illiterate peasants did this for a bowl of soup. The sinking of the Titanic became a symbolic act of farewell to the era of giants. It was a sacrifice, marking the transition to a new, simplified reality. To a world of plastic, concrete, and cheap counterfeits. A world where knowledge is replaced by instructions, and history by propaganda. Those who are at the helm of this conspiracy, call them the world government, predictors, or priests, perfectly understood what they were doing. They needed to erase the memory of past greatness. As long as artifacts like the Titanic existed, people could ask questions. People could compare, and the comparison was not in favor of the new power. Therefore, the giants had to go tragically, loudly, so that fear of the elements would paralyze the will to seek the truth. The catastrophe was inevitable not because of an iceberg, but because of technological incompatibility. We were trying to operate a time machine with a wrench, and when it exploded, we invented a beautiful tale of love and death to conceal our insignificance. We live on ruins which we didn't even bother to properly study before we started destroying them. The Titanic lies at the bottom not as a monument to human carelessness, but as a time capsule holding the secrets of metallurgy and engineering that we have lost. And every time submersibles descend to it, we are shown only what can be shown. Boots, plates, the captain's bathtub. But we are never shown microscopic cross-sections of the metal at the fracture points. We are never shown the seabed beneath a layer of silt where engine parts might lie, whose operating principle would revolutionize physics. Because if we learn the truth about the Titanic, the entire house of cards of our history will collapse. We will understand that we are not the pinnacle of evolution, but the degraded remnants of something greater.